Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai, Baruchim Abayim. We're continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, on the very bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as is Chut Rufu'ah Shelema for Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, Rufu'ah Shelema. Yes, of course, that's the bracha bat Chaya, and also one of our members, actually father-in-law, whose name was Nisim ben Miriam, right? Amen. Thank you. We are at the very bottom of the Amud. We started the discussion of the concept of migu. Do we say that a wall that is kasher for Shabbat and is a creative option of kashrut can be also used for Sukkah despite the halachot of Sukkah? That would not allow normally for that wall. And vice versa. If you have a creative wall in Ilchot Sukkah that's kasher, can it be used for mechitzot Shabbat to create a Reshut HaYachid? And we mentioned three different options that are all mentioned in the Gemara. The very first option we mentioned is that Sukkah has a chidush, has a novelty in halakha that's not shared by Hilchot Shabbat, and that is Shnaim kilchatam ushtishid afilu tefach. If you have two walls and the third one, a tefach that's attached to them, is kasher in Hilchot Sukkah, even though that you have doors inside the other two walls, still would be kasher. Even though that if you go now and with a measuring tape go around, there is less wall than there is open, still is kasher, which is the first picture you see over here. Those are two walls that each one has a door in them, and you have a little tefach over here, and that is kasher. Now for Shabbat, that should not be kasher, because one of the basic halachot of mechitza in Shabbat is you need Omed merube al haparutz. You need more wall than open in order to be a mechitza kshera. And yet the Gemara says, once it is kasher for Sukkah, it could be used also on Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot, which is Shabbat, and still is considered a Reshut HaYachid. Secondly, we mentioned the Chidush of Rava, that you say that even the other way around, which is more chamur, Shabbat is more chamur than Sukkah, and yet the Gemara says in Daf Chaf Aleph in Masechet Eruvin that for Olei Regalim, when they would come to Yerushalayim, imagine to yourself, Olei Regalim are coming. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, and they're coming with their animals. And they need water on the way. Otherwise, they'll die. So you have wells that would be dug for this very purpose, but there's a basic problem with that. The basic problem is the wells usually are lower than 10 tefachim, so they can constitute a Reshut HaYachid, and the outside of it is public domain, Reshut HaRabim, and if you draw water to give to your animals, you can't put the animal inside the well, right? For yourself, actually, the Gemara says two things. You have to understand that this entire thing was b'di'evet. The Gemara says this was a heter only for Orei Regalim. You cannot do this during the year. Only a heter for Orei Regalim and only for their animals. So people would bend over in the cavity of the well and drink, because they could do that. Animals can't do it. So therefore, you could take water out of the well, which now you took it out of Reshut HaYachid, and you pour it into a shoket hamayim, into the vessel that the animals would drink from, and that is, of course, on Shabbat, isur hotzah. If you take something out of Reshut HaYachid and you put it in Reshut HaRabim, even though that you just moved it a few inches, that's a transgression of a deoraita. Or if you walk 4 amot with it in Reshut HaRabim itself. But changing Reshuyot, putting something from Reshut HaYachid into Reshut HaRabim or vice versa, would be, of course, a transgression of a deoraita. And here is exactly that. You're taking water out of the well, pouring it outside. So Chazal made a heter of paseh biraot, that you have 8 miniature walls, right? 4 of these L-shaped walls. Each one of them is 1 amah on each side, and that is considered as though the inside area around the well is Reshut HaYachid. And you could only for Oler Regalim, only for the animals, you could use that, right? So it says the Gemara, on Sukkot, you could also make a schach on top of this and make it a sukkah, and that would be kasher. Because once you're telling me that these are considered mechitza, so it's as if you have 4 walls around this, and Hazaku Baruch, it would be considered a sukkah that's kasher, which is massive chidush, because of course you don't have 4 walls. You don't even have 2 walls. You don't even have 1 wall. You only have like this 4 corners, and that's somehow considered mechitza le'ilchot Shabbat. And the chidush is, I could even use it for Hilchot Sukkah against the normal parameters of Hilchot Sukkah, requiring a minimum of 2.5 walls, 2 walls and a tefach. And the third and final chidush that we said is this maboy, that even though that's maboy mefolash, according to Rashi at least, it's an open alley from 2 ways, and you don't have attached walls. You only have a little lechi, which works only for Shabbat, to create a Reshut HaYachid for you to be able to carry on Shabbat that 1 beam, 1 tefach thick beam that's attached to the wall over here is sufficient to make this area a Reshut HaYachid. That could be kasher even if you make schach on top of it, or on top of half of it. So you put a little schach over here, and this would be considered a sukkah that is kasher as well, even though that normally making 2 walls that are parallel together and wanting to create a 3rd wall would require you to have a minimum of a tefach sochek, which means you have 3 tefachim here, and you have 1 tefach of wall. This together would be 4, or you will have even bigger, larger, that would be a 4 tefachim beam, which would create a 7 tefachim wall over here. That would be the normal halacha of Hilchot Sukkah. But because on Shabbat of Chol HaMoed, right? Because this area is considered the Reshut HaYachid for Shabbat, on that day, you don't need to have this or this. You can suffice with this little lechi on the side and the schach on top, and the way we go, it's a kosher sukkah. Those are the chidushim that we saw. Now, the Gemara is going to go through a process of why we need to say all 3. Why can't you just tell me one of them, and I'll know all the other ones? Just tell me on Shabbat, whatever mechitza on Shabbat is good, it'll be good on Sukkah. Isn't that enough? Just tell me, and I'll know that it goes both ways, and I'll know that any mechitza on Shabbat would be good. Why do I have to specify paseh biraot is good on Shabbat, and it's going to be good on Sukkah? The maboy with a lechi, it's good on Shabbat, it will be good. Just tell me whatever mechitza works on Shabbat works for Sukkah, and nekuda, period. I'll know the rest of them by myself. I'll know that from Sukkah to Shabbat works. I'll know that paseh biraot work. I'll know that the lechi and the maboy work. Why do you have to specify all 3? That's the question of the Gemara. Gufa. Says the Gemara, 3 words before the end of the Amud. Amar Rava, sichech al gabe maboy sheyesh lo lechi keshera. Rava says it works if you have this last case that we just mentioned, case number 3, that if you have a alleyway and you have 1 beam, which is a tefach wide, you could put schach on top of it, and Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkah is fine to go. Ve'amar Rava. Rava also says that the paseh biraot is good, which is the middle case over here. Right, the well and a surrounding area with the 4 corner walls that are 1 amah each, and it's good. So Mara says, Vesricha. He needs to say both of them. Why can't he just say one of them and factor in everything else with one halacha? Says the Gemara is simple. Mishum de Ika, the Iashman Maboy, if he would just tell me the third case, which is the case of the alleyway, Mishum de Ika Shtedefanot Ma'aliyata, I would say, wow, at least there you have 2 full walls. And we understand the Sukkah, the halacha of Sukkah is Shnayim Kilchatam, or Shishid Afiru Tefach. So even though that normally speaking, the third one that's going to be Tefach, we need the Tefach to be here to create the Tefach Sochek, we could understand how you could have Shishid Afiru Tefach sufficing with the Tefach of the beam of Lechi. Still you have Shnayim Kilchatam, 2 full walls, or Shishid Afiru Tefach. So it's very much aligned with the general pattern of Hilchot Sukkah. It's less of a chidush. Aval gabe paseh biraot. For paseh biraot, where is your wall? There is no wall. You put just 4 L-shaped corners, and you're calling that a mechitza. Gabe paseh biraot deleka shte defanot. There's no 2 full walls. Emalo. I would have thought that it's not going to work. That's already too much of a stretch, and therefore he needs to say it. So you'll ask, why can't he say it the other way around, right? By paseh biraot, if you would say only paseh biraot, I would say, well, paseh biraot at least has 4 walls. In other words, it's 4 corners representing 4 walls. There is something there that you could imagine these extending together. There is 8 pieces of blanks of wood, 1 amma each. So it's like 4 walls with big doors in the middle. So that imagery of 4 walls is still there, but by the alleyway, there aren't really enough aspects of Sukkah. Says the Gemara, there you don't have, you just have 2 walls of the street. Well, how does that constitute a sukkah when it's an open street, mefulash? People are going and coming, that's supposed to be a dirat aray or dirat keva. What kind of dira is that? You know, it doesn't represent a 4-walled thing. So says the Gemara, or even 3-walled thing. That's why you need both of them. Each one of them is mechudash, is a novelty in its own way. That wouldn't be understood necessarily by mentioning just the other one. Why do you need the first one? Well, says that's very simple. Why you need the third case, which is in our thing the first, in the order of the Gemara's mentioning is the first. Because mechamira lekilta, aval mekilta lechamirta, emalo sricha. Because we may think to ourselves, if Rava only would say case number 2 and case number 3, would say, well, yeah, because they're considered the mechitza for Shabbat. Shabbat is isur karet, is chiyuv mitah. It's a much more chamur concept. Conceptually, Shabbat is much more severe than Sukkah. And the halachot of mechitzot by Shabbat is more severe than Sukkah, right? You need omed beruba al parutz. There are certain halachot that are more stringent on Shabbat, normally speaking. So therefore, I would say to myself, well, if something works for Shabbat, you find some anomaly, novelty of leniency in Hilchot Shabbat, of course it's going to work for Sukkah, which is much more lenient. But if I find a novelty, leniency in Hilchot Sukkah, who says works for Shabbat? It doesn't work that way. Shabbat is much more chamur. Maybe it only works for Sukkah. So maybe we only say migu from Shabbat to Sukkah, but not from Sukkah to Shabbat. Every one of us around this table would say that. So therefore, says the Gemara, I would not have understood that you could apply the leniency of the mechitzot on Sukkah to Shabbat. So I would have thought that this Sukkah on Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot should be pasul, because it doesn't have more wall than open. He has more open than wall, which goes against the basic rule of the mechitzot of walls on Shabbat. Therefore, the Gemara has to say that no, you could even apply leniencies of Sukkah to Shabbat and say that once these walls are good for Sukkot, for Chag HaSukkot, are going to be good for Shabbat also. Even though that if you go camping somewhere on Shabbat during the course of the year, and you say, well, I remember we made the Sukkah like this, so I'll just bring my frame in my RV and put it there, and it will be a Reshut HaYachid. Good luck with that. That's not going to work. It's not considered a Mechitza for Hilchot Shabbat because Omed needs to be Merubeh ala Parutz. Still, for Chag HaSukkot, the Chol HaMoed, it will work. So we need all three of anomalies, of leniencies in Hilchot Shabbat and Sukkah mentioned in our Gemara. Fine. Now, says the Gemara, the next concept in the Mishnah, right? So remember, we're going one by one, knocking out the cases that the Mishnah said, and our Mishnah said Sukkah is pasul if you have it taller than 20 amot, if you have it lower, shallower than asarat fachim, and something that doesn't have shalosh defanot, which was the last thing we discussed. And the very last thing in the Mishnah is v'shechamatah meruba misilatah psula. If you have more sun than shade, would also be pasul. You need more shade than sun. So says the Gemara, let's explore this. V'shechamatah meruba misilatah psula. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned chamata machmat sichuch velo machmat defanot. We have to explore this because when you talk about having more shade than sun, are we talking about the shade of the schach, or are we talking about shade in general? For instance, if you have a thick, nice, beautiful bamboo schach on top of another bamboo schach, and you have mamash, fantastic schach, no sun is coming in, mamash, but you have a tall sukkah, and you have an airy sukkah, you have, like, let's say a trellis or a pergola, and the sun is coming from through the defanot. So there's a lot of sun in the sukkah, more sun than shade. But if you would have the proper walls, it would be certainly more shade than sun. Is that kasher or not? At the end of the day, you ended up with more sun in your sukkah than shade, but it's not because of the schach, it's because of the walls. Is that good or is that not good? Right? So says Gemara, it's only, says the Braita in the Gemara, chamata machmat sichuch. It's only pasul if the sun that you get, that's more than shade, is because of the lack of proper schach. Velo machmat defanot. But if it's because of defanot, it's kasher, it's no problem. Rabbi Yoshia Omer, Rabbi Yoshia says, no, it depends on everything. Even if you have a greatest schach ever, but you have more sun than shade in your sukkah because of lack of proper walls, pasul. Af machamat defanot. Amar Rabbi Yemar bar Shlamya, Mishmed Abaye, said in the name of Abaye, my Talmud Rabbi Yoshia. Why would Rabbi Yoshia say such a thing? And says Abaye, he learned it actually from a pasuk. You ready for this? So, again, we go back to Kodesh HaKodashim. It's awesome how the comparison of Sukkah that we walk in, we become like the Kohen Gadol 5 minutes a year going to Kodesh HaKodashim. The entire Sukkah is like everything in Sukkah so far. We have learned from the kaporet on top of the Aron, the Kruvim, and now one more. Dichtiv v'sakota ala Aron et parochet. That when you make the parochet, what was parochet? What was the curtain between Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy and the Holy of Holies? There's a curtain, parochet. Parochet HaMasach, it's called. From the language of schach. V'sakota ala Aron, it should be towering and making a schach, sakota, ala Aron, over the Aron. So says Rabbi Shlomo, what? It's a schach on top of the Aron? Of course not. It's not a schach, it's a wall, it's a mechitza. So why does the pasuk call it a schach? I found in the source that we go to for everything in Sukkah, which is Kodesh HaKodashim, Aron, Kaporet, Kiruvim, Parochet, it says the language of Schach, and it's referencing to what? A wall, a Mechitza. So it says, the Gemara, says Rabbi Yoshia, Abai is explaining, Parochet Mechitzahi, it's a Mechitza, V'kakarye Rachman Schach, and Hashem is calling it Schach. Alma, you see from here, Mechitza Schach Bainan. We need a Mechitza that is going to be like a Schach. So just like Schach can't be Chamatam Ruba Misilatam, can't have more sun than shade, your wall also can't have more sun than shade. Right? Simple. The Rabbanan, sounds like a very powerful idea, right? Chachamim disagree with that. They say, well, it doesn't mean that. It means the reason that it says sakota, language of schach, for parochet, even though that it's just a wall, because it's going to tell you that the very end top of the parochet is bent towards the aron. It's not like a regular curtain that the top of it is open or whatnot. It is curved on top, like almost like a schach, over the area of Kodesh HaKodashim. That's what it means, but not to learn that it has to be like a schach. Fine. Now, for a count, we spoke about this before, whether or not Sukkah needs to be Dirat Keva or Dirat Arai, right? Remember that? When we spoke about having large Sukkah, how large it has to be, or how tall can it be? Does it have to be built as a Dirat Arai, or can it even be built as a Dirat Keva, as a sturdy, nice structure? Now, Abaye actually goes through a head count of 8 different Tanaim and Amoraim that they all hold, well, Tanaim, they all hold that Sukkah needs to be Dirat Keva. Sukkah needs to be a place fit for a proper living space, right? Let's read this. Amar Abaye, Rabbi v'Rabbi Yoshia, Rabbi and Rabbi Yoshia, v'Rabbi Yehuda, v'Rabbi Shimon, v'Rabban Gamliel, u'Bet Shammai, v'Rabbi Elazar, v'Acherim, kulhu, all 8 of them, sevir alehu, sukkah dirat keva ba'inan. They all hold that Sukkah needs to be Dirat Keva. Now take a look at Rashi before you misunderstand this. Rashi says, Dirat Keva ru'ya le'ishtamesh kavua. It needs to be able to be used as a living space. V'nir'et kabayit. Looks like a house of some sort of comparison. Right? And we'll see in different opinions here will differ exactly how much of a Dirat Keva it is. So now it goes through all of them. Rebbe the Tanya, how do we know Rabbi Yehuda Nasi needs a Dirat Keva? So all of us remember, of course, because we just did this, that there's a 3-way machloket on Daf Gimal and on what exactly the minimum amount of space it's required for Sukkah. So Beit Hillel holds 6 Tfachim by 6 Tfachim. Beit Shammai holds 7 Tfachim by 7 Tfachim. A big difference. And all of a sudden you have a massive jump to Shitat Rebbe. Rebbe holds a minimum amount of space that you need for Sukkah is 6 feet by 6 feet. 4 amot by 4 amot. Why does he hold that? Why not 7 Tfachim by 7? You could fit in 7 Tfachim by 7 Tfachim. Even your table fits in there. Rabbi Omer, kol sukkah shem ba'arba amot, psula. Any sukkah less than 4 amot by 4 amot is pasul. So you see that Rabbi holds you need a living space. It's not some hole in the wall that you can fit yourself in. Fitting yourself in and even fitting your shulchan in, it's not sufficient. You need a living space, right? We learned this in the Gemara, in the Sugya, that every time it says bayit, house, needs to be 4 by 4, right? Remember that? For mezuzah, for ma'akeh, for all those living spaces, it needs to be 4 amot by 4 amot. So that's simple, straightforward. Rabbi Yoshia, how do we see that Rabbi Yoshia holds like that? Hadamaran, we just spoke about Rabbi Yoshia, right? Rabbi Yoshia holds in our sugya over here that it's not kasher if the walls are shedding too much sun inside the sukkah. If at the end of the day, even though you have fantastic schach, if it's too sunny, if it's not comfortably shaded, it's not good enough. So you see from Rabbi Yoshia also, you need a proper, nice, secluded, shaded area that will be a living space, a proper living space. It's not merely enough to just drop some ceiling of schach and you'll call that a shak, a sukkah. That's not good enough. It has to be proper. The walls have to be proper. Walls have to be proper. It's a living space. It's dirat keva of some sort. Rabbi Yehuda, how do you know Rabbi Yehuda? Because we learned the Mishnah. Sukkah she'gvam lemala mikaf ama, the very beginning of Masechet Succah. If you have a sukkah that's taller than 20 amot, the Mishnah says it's psula. Why does Rabbi Yehuda hold? No problem, it's kasher, right? The Rabbi Yehuda machshir. And now you remember, we all remember, that the Gemara said, lemala me'esrim amot, you cannot build a flimsy structure, right? Remember, we're talking about something that is 30 feet tall. 30 feet is 20 amot. If you have that, you need to build it sturdy and nice. So you see from Rabbi Yehuda that a sukkah could be dirat keva. Now, this is a little bit of a jump, because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say you must have a dirat keva, because it could have a dirat keva. But nevertheless, you see that a structure of a sukkah with sturdy walls is something that the Torah allows and perhaps wants, because we mentioned that the sukkah should be only for Shivat Yamim, you need dirat arai, and Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of that. He says, no, you live in it the way you live in your own house, which would, short of that drasha of Shivat Yamim, a structure of 7 days only, if Rabbi Yehuda X's that out, which he does, then you need a space like your house to be fit for a proper living space. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon the Tanya, next in line is Rabbi Shimon, and that we know because the Braita says, Shnaim kil chatan u'shlishi lafiluta. We just had this, right? According to Chachamim, how many walls do you need? 2 plus a tefach. According to Rabbi Shimon, how many walls do you need? 3 full walls plus a tefach. And do you remember what the Gemara said the reason is for Rabbi Shimon? Because of pasuk in Yeshayahu, you remember? V'sukat yeh lesel yomam, that the sukkah has to be not just a sel yomam of shade protecting you from the sun, but it has to also protect you from the rain and the wind and all those elements outside. Why would he require such a thing? Because he requires an actual living space. Not just some dirat arai, but it has to be re'uya in the language of Rashi, for a living space. It has to be fit for a shtamshut, a usage of an actual living space. Fine. But Rabban Gamliel Netanya, how do you know Rabban Gamliel? Because it says, the Braita says, Ha'oseh sukato brosh ha'agala. This is a Gemara we're going to have in Daf Chav Gimel, a few pages later. This is actually like Chabad 101, right? Training, right? Can you make a sukkah on top of a pickup truck, right? And go around with with Sukkot music, make sure every Jew sits in the sukkah for a few seconds and shakes lulav on the throat. It's an amazing thing. Can you have such a... no, they didn't have pickup trucks, but they have agalot, they had horse and buggy. So, can you have a horse and buggy sukkah? It's a Gemara later on in Daf Chav Gimel. And Rabban Gamliel holds it's pasul. You cannot have that. Right? Or on a boat. Right? You want to do a cruise on Chag HaSukkot, you cannot really have that. The Tanya houses kato berosh agala, or berosh asfina, on top of a pickup truck or on top of a boat. Rabban Gamliel posel. Rabban Gamliel holds this pasul. You cannot have that. Rabbi Akiva machshir. Rabbi Akiva says mutar. What's the svara of Rabban Gamliel that he says it's pasul? Well, it's because it's shaky. It's not dira. It's very temporary, right? You never live on top of a bumpy, shaky place like that. Oh, that's for the agala. And on the sfina, the Gemara later on is going to say because sfina does not have any walls or mountains around it. It's in the middle of the heart of the sea. So nothing stops the winds, the strong winds to come. And it's not omed beruach metzuya. A regular sukkah that you would build on top of a deck of a ship or a boat is going to stay until it's blown away, right? That's what's it. So you have a sukkah for a few hours. It's nice and sunny now. Comes the nighttime or the evening time or the early morning time when the little wind comes, the whole thing is going to be in the sukkah, right? In the sea, right? It's actually a humorous story the Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Akiva holds this kasher. He built it, and in the morning it was not there. It was blown into the water. It says, Akiva, hechal sukkatcha. Where is your sukkah that you were so proud of, right? So it's a very dirat arai structure. It's literally a temporary structure. And if you require a dirat keva, some sort of sturdy thing, then it will be pasul. So you see from here that Rabban Gamliel, who says pasul, requires a dirat keva, and more of a sturdy, long-standing type of structure. And says the Gemara, Bet Shammai ditnan. How do you know Bet Shammai needs dirat keva? As we say in the Mishnah, Mishaya rosho verubo besukam. This is what we discussed earlier on when we discussed the whole concept of the minimum amount of space needed for sukkah. But this is really a Mishnah later on. If you have a person that his majority of the body and his head is inside the sukkah, but his table, his food is inside the house, Bet Shammai hold it is pasul. Now we mentioned there, and this is in Daf Gimel, that later on when this Mishnah is actually mentioned, you see that it's not just an issue of your table being in the house, but you're in a big sukkah, but we're actually discussing perhaps a minimalistic sukkah that only fits your head, the majority of your body, versus a sukkah that also fits your table or your sandwich. And Bet Hillel says 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim, which fits your head and the majority of your body sitting in the sukkah, is sufficient. That's a kosher sukkah. And Bet Shammai says no, it has to fit also your shulchan. You have to be able to live somewhat in there. So you see from here that Bet Shammai is the one that holds you need more of a dirat keva, because without eating, what kind of life is that? You're going to die without eating. You have to be able to have also eating space in your house. Bet Shammai posner bet Machshir. Rabbi Eliezer ditnan, right? Rabbi Eliezer is the one that holds ha'oses katoke means sarif o smacha lekotel. Rabbi Eliezer posel. The question is, if you have a sukkah which is not four-walled, this is later on in Daf Yud Zayin, we discuss what if I have a structure of schach, of beams with just leaves on top, like a backwards V, right? You have a V backwards, and you're inside here, right? You're inside here, and this is all schach, right? It's kosher schach. These are all leaves. Is that kasher or not? Or you have a wall of your house. This is the wall of your house, and you just have one of these, right? It's all leaves, and you're here inside. Is that kasher or pasul? Right? You don't have four walls. You don't have a structure. Is that kasher or pasul? So Rabbi Eliezer says that's pasul. Right? We're going to discuss this at length. A lot of gishmak rate bites. when you get to Daf Yud Zayin. But for now, for our purposes, you want to know what Rabbi Eliezer holds? It's pasul. And therefore, says the Gemara, the reason that he says it's pasul is because this is no house. Yeah, he made a little shade there. The sayadeh ofot, people wanted to catch birds, would use this, right? Go inside, hiding, camouflaging inside the thing. So it happens to be Chakas Sukkot, Chazaku Baruch, right? I'm sitting in the Sukkah. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, that's not Dirat Keva. So you see from here, they need Dirat Keva in the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. And last but not least, says the Gemara, Acherim, a.k.a. Rabbi Meir, right? The other ones, who usually is a kinui for Rabbi Meir, right, is the last, which holds, the Brayta says, the Tanya Acherim Omrim, Sukkah Suyak Shovach. If you have a sukkah like a birdhouse is very round. A circle sukkah, right? You get one of these gazebos that they sell ready for $900 in Home Depot, right? You alter the top, you put some schach on top of it, chazak u'ruch. Is that kasher? Rabbi Meir Acherim say no, it's pasul. A round sukkah is going to be pasul according to the Shita of Rabbi Meir, lefi she'en la zaviyot, because it doesn't have corners. It's not. And something that doesn't have corners is not a sturdy wall. Usually, when you want sturdy walls, you'll have 4 walls. That will give you a sturdy structure. Usually, something that you build on a round thing, it's not as sturdy, so therefore it will be pasul. So we went through 8 different shitot of Tanaim that they all hold that a sukkah needs to be a sturdier structure that's fit for a proper living space. Tomorrow we'll have a fantastic discussion about a round sukkah, and you'll see that the number of pi, right, 3.14, right? So that actually is discussed over here in the Gemara, and is really discussed by Shlomo Melech in his what he used as Yam Shel Shlomo, and fantastic mathematical calculations of the areas of Sukkah, which will be very, very fun, Be'ezrat Hashem, for tomorrow morning. Zaku Baruch.